Hello, welcome back to my channel. If you're new around here, my name's Kit, and this is my world. Thank you very much for joining me. In this episode, I'm going to be doing a book review. I know, it's a miracle. I've actually read a book, a proper book, a grown-up book. A book that some of you might have read. No more tags, no more children's books. This is grown-up stuff. So I hope you're sitting comfortably because I'm going to be talking like an adult. Maybe not. But this came about because I was talking to my better half and he was waxing lyrical about this amazing book that he had read several years ago that he particularly enjoyed. And as he was describing this book, I started to get interested. And so I bought it. I downloaded it on my Kindle, to the surprise of us both. And then I read it and actually finished it, which frankly amazed us both, because I'm a terrible mood reader and I'm very rarely in the mood for anything other than the books I'm in the mood for. And yet I read this book without being in the mood. It's a new development in my life. I'm starting to grow and blossom as a reader. It's very exciting. So I thought I'd share my thoughts and feelings about this particular book with you in a sort of spontaneous random video. This isn't a scheduled video. This isn't planned. It's not scripted or prepared in any way. I'm just going to stream consciousness. It's a panting by the seat of my flies. No? It's not one of those. That's a different kind of video entirely. It's a flying by the seat of my pants kind of video. So I apologise for the fact that I'm uneducated. I'm not a very clever person. I dropped out of school at 14 and I don't really read grown-up books that often. So I probably won't be able to talk very intelligently about this. But this is a book that is of interest because I read it when not in the mood, which is new, and it's of interest because I didn't enjoy the experience of reading it, and yet I carried on and finished it. And it's interesting because once I'd finished it, I had quite a profound emotional reaction. There was a bit of a delay, and I sort of smiled at my boyfriend and he smiled at me and said, "Have you finished it?" And I said, "Yes." And then there was a pause. And then I burst into tears and I cried quite a lot. And then some very interesting conversation followed about the book. And so I'm not going to share all of it with you, but I'm going to share some of my thoughts and feelings about The Buried Giant by Kazuo Ishiguro. And I apologise for my pronunciation. This was published in March 2015 and Kazuo Ishiguro is a Nobel Prize winning author of considerable distinction. He's considered one of the best authors ever, and he's a Sir as well. And despite his name, he is of Japanese heritage, but he grew up from, I think, the age of 5 or so. He grew up in England, so he's an English person who speaks English. And I emphasise this because I had assumed, as British people sometimes do, from his name, that the book that I was reading was a translation. And it isn't a translation. It was written and originated in English, but it felt translated. That was the first thing I noticed about it. It felt translated, and that was kind of off-putting. I since discovered that it was written deliberately in a slightly stilted, odd and unnatural way. It was all by design. In fact, everything about the book that I didn't like was by design. So it's not badly written. None of the stuff that I didn't like was a mistake or could have been corrected. It's just, I suppose, not my taste. But the whole book is written in a very swirly sort of style. There's almost no world building at all, at least not in the way that I understand world building, because I'm from fantasy. I'm from a Tolkienian way of world building, which is to describe everything in intimate detail. Every blade of grass gets lovingly detailed and described, and it paints a picture for the reader that leaves nothing to the imagination, and yet everything to the imagination. And it's very visual and very Tolkienian. That's the kind of books that I like reading. This one leaves almost everything to the imagination. It kind of makes the reader do all the work. And I'm a lazy reader. I read children's books. So it was kind of swirly. It didn't have any of the hard edges that I like. I like to feel safe as a reader. I like to know that the author is telling me a specific thing, and that thing is specific, and I can hang on to that, and that is a fact. And it's solid and palpable. This book is very swirly, and it's set during Dark Ages Britain, in a period that historically is, well, there's very little known about the Dark Ages, and that was a deliberate choice by the author. He wanted to write about a fictitious post-Arthurian British landscape that historians couldn't really argue with, because no one knows what it was like back then. It's the Dark Ages for a reason. So he set his book during this period, and he wanted to explore the mentality of warrior hive-mindedness. There's a word for it which I can't remember. I'll put a caption. This video isn't going to have very much opportunity for editor kit to do graphical type stuff, so I'll put a caption up here to explain that thing. But it's basically the way warrior people, warrior tribes cope with the shit that they have to deal with by kind of collectively agreeing to forget about it. And so this book kind of swirls around metaphorically in the realms of memory and loss of memory. And in the context of this book, it's kind of a spell. There's a magic spell that is preventing people from remembering. And I have to be very careful about spoilers, because it would be very easy to give away things that you're supposed to discover organically as you progress through the book. So I'm not really going to say anything more about the memory thing, except that the characters all have memory problems, especially with their long-term memory. And it's all very confusing and very ethereal and very wispy. And the characters and, by extension, the reader, are grasping at little flimsy fragments of facts, or they might not be facts, they might be memories, or imagined things. And it's very difficult to know what's real and what isn't real. But the book mainly focuses on two characters, Axel and Beatrice, who are two Britons. At some point, they start remembering that they may have had a son many years ago. These are elderly people. This is an elderly married couple very much in love. And they start to remember that they may have had a son, and that he left for some reason, and he's living in another village. And so through circumstances and events that happen, they decide that they're going to leave their village and go in search of their son and go and live with him, or at least visit him. And the whole book is largely their journey from their village where they start on their way to see their son. And along the way, they meet a few other people. They meet a knight, and they meet a hero, a heroic warrior, and they meet a mysterious boy who has some sort of strange powers, perhaps, but it's not ever fully properly explained. And they meet various Saxon tribes, because this was a period in ancient Britain, or medieval Britain, Dark Ages Britain. It was a period in Dark Ages Britain when the Britons and the Saxons, there was kind of conflict. The Saxons had invaded, but during this period, it's a relatively peaceful period, possibly due to amnesia. I won't say any more about that. So they meet these various characters, and they proceed on the journey together, and various events happen, and I didn't enjoy any of it. I couldn't wait to get to the end. The whole thing I found kind of ponderous. It was intellectual. It was a tone poem. That's what I think of as a tone poem. And because I'm not very educated, I don't actually know what a tone poem is officially. But when I think of a tone poem, I think of Star Trek: The Motion Picture. It's an exploration of stuff. life experience, the experience of being a person and consciousness and all of that. And it's sort of swirly and a little bit mystical. And it explores these things in a very slow and ponderous way. It's not entertaining. And I'm probably a very unsophisticated reader, and I know this is coming from an extremely celebrated and respectable author, so I have to trust that he knew what he was doing and I just didn't fully get it. If I hadn't have been reading it with the specific intention of impressing my boyfriend and having something to talk about afterwards because he had read the book and he was excited about it, I probably would have DNF'd it because I found it kind of a chore and also disjointed. The writing style was disjointed, as I say. It was deliberately written in an odd style. The dialogue is brilliant in places, but also very odd and unrealistic. No human being in the history of the universe has ever spoken the way these ones do. It's not like it's written in Old English or anything. It's written in a bizarre, made-up, stilted way. And the whole thing felt a little bit self-conscious and a little bit masturbatory, perhaps. And as I was reading it, and this is probably... I might actually get stoned to death by proper booktubers if I say this out loud, so I'm going to say it very quietly and very quickly. Anyone could have written it. I know, don't hate me, don't hate me. It felt like a first-time novelist. It felt amateurish. And obviously it's my fault I just didn't get it, because this guy's got... He's got a Nobel Prize for this shit. So obviously he knows more than I do, but it felt really kind of clunky and amateurish and poorly put together and poorly conceived. The whole thing just felt really weird. I didn't hate it. If I'd hated it, that would have been because there had been something there to grasp hold of, to hate. But this was just so wispy and so flimsy, and it felt like there was no substance to it at all. Until I got to the end, the very end, and understood the metaphor. The whole book is one giant metaphor, and it's metaphors piled on top of metaphors, and it kind of made sense at the end a lot more. And I was helped a little bit by my boyfriend in understanding it as well. And also, by the way, because neither of us had intended for me to read it, he had actually spoiled the ending. When he'd described the book to me, he'd told me how it ended. So as I was reading it, as I was working my way through this misty thicket, if that's not a bizarre mixture of images, as I was working my way through this thing, I kind of knew where it was heading because he'd told me how it ended, but he'd also left me with a very particular phrase in my head, which was, it's not the way the story ends, it's the way it's told. And it didn't disappoint. It was actually the last chapter was excellent, really good. And as I say, it moved me. It took a little while to sink in and to settle, and then the tears flowed, and there were lots and lots of tears, and there was snot, and it was ugly. And I may have had to blow my nose on my t-shirt. It was a very interesting reading experience, possibly the most interesting reading experience I've ever had, and yet boring. Yeah, it was both interesting and boring at the same time, and that's probably the best way that I can sum up this book. It's a book that you have to make it all the way to the end to fully appreciate, and even then there's not very much to appreciate. There's just a little kernel of something to appreciate, but that little kernel, if it hits you in just the right spot, it can be quite a profound experience, as it was for me. And on that note, I think I'll call it a day. Thank you very, very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, and you haven't already, you know what to do. Please hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, share, comment, do all the good stuff, and I will see you next time. See you later.